Hi everyone, this is a quick introductory video on drawing fur photorealistically. You can see here there's a drawing of a cat, and if I zoom in close you can see how detailed and how many fur strokes there are in a given area. If I zoom out again you can get the better effect of the whole. If I go to the top here, you can see something that we do in one of my lessons on drawing fur. This is drawing a cat's paw. Again, if I go in close here, look and see how many strokes there are in a given area. So for this cat's paw, it's a light cat, it's got a creamy colour, so I've used H, H and HB. Over in a lighter area I've used 3H. I've used some sgraffito, which we'll go into in a bit, and I've used softer pencils 2B and B. So that's basically short-haired fur, which we'll be covering. And then we move down to long-haired fur. So this is a drawing of my dog Millie, who's a Lhasa Apso. And if we go in close, you can see a bit more detail on the long fur down here. Right, drawing short-haired fur. I'm going to be using Faber Castell 9000 pencils in HB. I'm going to be using a Tombow Mono Zero eraser later on when we're showing highlights, and I'm also going to be using what's called an embossing tool to do sgraffito. But first of all, we're going to start off with the basic fur stroke. Okay, first thing to say is that I'm working on a drawing board which is upright, angled up, so my whole forearm and the side of my hand is supported. You can do this way or you can do it flat. Whatever you do, you need to have some modicum of control. If you're doing this, you've got no control over what your pencil's doing. So whilst you still obviously need to be able to move your hand up and down whilst you're doing your drawing strokes, you need to have that purchase with the paper. Okay, that's very important. Second most important thing is to have a really pin sharp pencil, because you can't get the effect that you want with very fine hairs and lots of them without it. Okay, you're better to get the effect of lots and lots of volume in fur and hair with many fine strokes rather than fewer thick strokes. It'll give you a much more realistic effect. So, how do we do the basic stroke? Well, if you might think you're going to do first stroke like this, okay, and if you were sketching, that would be fine. However, if you want it to look really realistic, you need to do something a little bit different. First of all, you can see the white gaps in between the different fur strokes. So it looks quite sparse. It doesn't look like you've got a lot of fur in that given area. So, and by the way, we're using H. If, alternatively, you go in up and then you come back down, you disguise where you've put your pencil, and it gives the appearance that you've got many hairs in that given area, which gives the appearance of thickness. Notice also at the end of every stroke, up and down, I'm flicking the end of the pencil. So it's a sort of a much more subtle flick. If you think your average hair thicker at the root and then it gets finer at the end, that's essentially what you're doing with your hair stroke. And you should be able to see the difference between those two. I've got many more strokes in that little area, and also with the flicking of the stroke, it looks softer and looks more realistic. Okay? Now, obviously, this is just with HB a pencil, so I've got a fair range within it. I can go lightly if I want to, So if I wanted to go gradually build up my tones, I could go in very, very light, barely pressing the surface, very, very lightly. And then if I wanted to come back in and add a bit more depth, I can then put more pressure. And when I'm doing that, I'm not gripping the pencil. I can actually feel it in my upper arm. That's where the control is. Because if you grip your pencil, you're going to end up with this. You heard that. It's going to snap. So you just want the control, but not too much so that you're gripping it. And of course you've got all the other range of pencil grades as well. So you've got your H pencils, which are the harder pencils with more clay. So if you had a lighter fur, you could use more H pencils like 3H, 2H, H, even 4H. If you've got something with very dark fur, you could then move up towards the B pencils as well. So you could come up to 2B, 3B, even higher if you need to. But bear in mind that if you're going higher than 2B or 3B, the end of the graphite of the pencil will be really, really thick and you won't be able to get it quite so sharp. So you also need to control your pressure on the pencil. So with just one HB pencil, I can go lightly. Let's go even lighter than that. I can go really, really lightly with it. I can go really dead heavy with it. And that's just my pressure doing that. Okay? It takes a lot of practice. And obviously, I should say as well, obviously if you're following the face of an animal, then the fur grows in different directions. So you've got to be able to maintain this stroke whilst making it appear as if the fur is growing in the direction that it goes in on the animal. So you need to be able to maintain this stroke and go vertically, horizontally, diagonally sometimes. But it does take practice. And as you can see, it's quite time consuming. However, it is also quite relaxing. Once you get the hang of it, you find you don't really think about it so much and it just kind of like becomes automatic. Difficult when you start because by the nature of trying something new, you have to think about it. But I bet you'll find once you try it, the moment where you get into a rhythm and you get into a flow is the time when it looks more realistic. Then you've got to remember what you did and repeat it. So that's basically short-haired photorealistic fur. Next we're going to move on to long-haired fur. Right, drawing long-haired fur, much like doing hair. Now, imagine I'm trying to do an area of hair, this sort of shape. If I try to come all the way from the top, all the way down to the bottom, all the way through this area, like this, given how many strokes we need to make it look realistic, which is the same on long-haired as it is short-haired fur, that's going to be really difficult to control. So you're not going to be doing this all the way through because look how you're going to get gaps. It's quite difficult to do that in a rhythmical way. So alternatively, again with a very, very sharp pencil, you start at the top and then gradually move your pencil down so that it all looks as if it's going, as if it's one long strand made up of lots and lots of gradually added pencil lines. And notice at the end of the stroke, I'm flicking it as well. Imagine that you're stroking this. Now, you've got to be really careful when you're doing this, that you don't suddenly veer off in a different direction. Because if you do, it'll look as if the hair's been cut. So, that takes control. And this is why I said it's easier if you can notice I'm keeping my hand on here, on the surface, so that it moves up and down and I've got some sort of control. If I'm doing this, I'm all over the place. Okay, so You do need to get into quite a rhythm. When you start, you won't be as quick as this because you'll be thinking about it and you will be placing your strokes a bit more. But really you want to try and get into a nice flowing rhythmical movement. So now I'm going to add a few more strokes with a bit more pressure, so I get a feeling of shadow and a multi-tonal effect, which looks much more realistic. And then at the end, you can come back into the end and start about halfway through and then tidy up if you need to, as long as you make sure that this area all looks as if it's going in one direction. It does take quite a bit of practice. Don't be put off if you find it difficult to start with. As with a short haired fur, practice. Really observe fur and hair. Stroke it, look at it, see how it grows. So that's your basic long-haired stroke. And if we look at the drawing of Millie, this is essentially what I've done on her ear here. So you've got long strokes, just as I did there, on her ear. Okay, so I started on this with, there's a lot of H pencils on here on the lighter area, and on her ear, where she's got a grey colour and a sort of a reddy colour, there's a lot of H, there's a lot of HB, there's B, there's 2B. So I've started with H and then I've gradually built up and got more pressure and got more depth into it. Okay. Now, if you wanted to take out some of that, say you'd gone a bit too heavy with it and you decided that you wanted to take a bit out and take a highlight out, this is where the Tombow Mono eraser comes in. Now, at this point, I have cut the Tombow Mono eraser directly through with a craft knife. So it goes straight through so you get a nice crisp edge. And then you hold that and take it down using exactly the same stroke and movement that you did when you used your pencil. Exactly the same thing. Now obviously it's not as fine as a pencil, so it will take out a little bit more. But this Tombow Mono eraser is absolutely superb for taking out detail. Okay, now once you've done that, you can then go back in again. If you think you've taken too much out, you can come back in with your pencil. You can add a few more. You can alter your pressure. So I could go back and think, oh, perhaps I've taken a bit too much out. I'll just put a light touch of strokes in there so it looks a little bit more realistic. And that gives you the effect. And you can keep doing that many times as you want. The only thing you've got to think about is the surface of the paper. So you want to avoid rubbing out as much as actually using the rubber as a rubber in rubbing out. If you're using it like this, it's a much more subtle technique. Okay, now I'm going to show you doing the sgraffito, and then after I've shown you the technique, we can have a look at the drawing of Millie so you can see where I've actually used it, context. So this is an embossing tool, which you can get from craft shops. You can get it online, and basically it's used for card making when you score into the central fold. And it's that the sgraffito technique is actually a painting technique, which basically means that you're making an indentation into the paper so that when you shade over the top, where you've made the indentation shows up light. Okay, you could use a darning needle, you could use what else could you use? You could use anything really that's not going to rip the paper, so don't use anything like a pin because you don't want to rip that paper. But I would suggest if you can get you can sometimes get a pack of these, a pack of 3, and you get the different sizes on the ends, so it's quite versatile. So I'm going to make an indentation, and I'm going to use this in exactly the same way as I use the pencil. And essentially what I'm doing, notice I'm doing this on the white paper first, so I haven't put any graphite on, because I am scoring into the paper, and where I'm scoring in, that's going to be the highlights, lighter areas, okay? Now I can press harder in some places, I can press lighter in others. Where I've pressed harder, it will show up more white because there's a deeper indentation, and where I've gone lightly, it'll be very subtle, okay? Now I'm going to use my HB and I'm going to go over the top using my normal first stroke, and look and see where I have used the sgraffito, it shows up white. Pretty neat, huh? If I put more pressure on or use a darker pencil, it'll show up even more. So if I used a 2B pencil and go over the top, you can see it showing up even more. So imagine you had a white cat, a dark cat with white whiskers. That would be a way you could get that effect. Now it does take quite a bit of practice using sgraffito, because obviously you're scoring into the paper. People are quite nervous about doing that, understandably. But sometimes it gives you such a good effect, and it's quite often the best way of achieving a good look, a good subtle look. And I tend to use a combination of both sgraffito and pointed tip eraser, because it does depend on the texture of the fur. If you've got coarse fur, then maybe sgraffito, use that a bit more because it's quite sharp point, so it's going to look more coarse. If it's more soft fur, then maybe use pointed tip eraser. Okay. Right, if we now look more closely at the drawing of Millie, you should be able to see a little bit of detail there where I've got the sgraffito. See those white marks at the top here? That's actually sgraffito that I've used first of all, and then I've gone back up with the pencil, with a 2B in this case, over the top. The line that's coming across here, that's also sgraffito, and there's some more sgraffito dotted around in certain places because her hair is blowing across, her fur even is blowing across over the top of the darker fur, so that's how you get that effect. You can also use a pointed tip eraser, and in places I have used a pointed tip eraser as well. That's where I've used the pointed tip eraser, if you can see that. Just here, very, very lightly, just to sort of make it look a little bit softer. And altogether, the variety of different pencil strokes, the different lengths of strokes, the different techniques combined together, but more than anything, tons and tons and tons of pencil lines, different strokes, different pressures, combines to give you the effect that you want. Okay? And if we come back to here, just to recap, long strokes, start at the top, work your way down, build up gradually, using sgraffito first of all, then going over the top doing the same technique will leave you with highlighted areas. Short haired fur, you can actually do the same thing with sgraffito, you're just doing short haired as opposed to long haired. And with short haired fur, Same technique really, you're going up and down, tapering your strokes, but you're coming up and you're coming down so that you disguise the strokes that you've made to make it look more realistic. And if we look back again at the drawing of the cat, you can see where I've done that on here. And also if we look at the drawing of the cat's paw, same thing there. Okay, so that's an introduction to drawing fur. I would suggest you do lots of practice. Don't try anything too complicated to start with. Just try and get the basic stroke right and see if you can replicate what I've shown you. Remember, sharp pencils and many, many, many fine strokes will give you a much more realistic effect. Good luck, and I hope you enjoy it. Bye.